we're starting off with a guest right off the top, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. And he's here to talk to me about General Flynn. Incredible news yesterday. Not necessarily the end of this saga, but certainly a big victory for people who like justice and people who are supporters of the president. Tom, great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me so early. I really appreciate that. Tell us the news that we got yesterday and why it's a big deal.
Well, the Justice Department, in an incredible move, told the court it didn't want to pursue the charges against General Flynn and would be dropping them. And it filed a 20-page document with multiple exhibits describing what I think can only be described as a criminal conspiracy to nail General Flynn, orchestrated out of the Obama administration, continued into the Trump administration by James Comey and others. And Comey coming across, though, as the ringleader. But interestingly, the documents show for the first time in great detail how Barack Obama was likely the culprit here, in the sense that he knew about the conversations and the wiretap between General Flynn and Ambassador Kislyak, and directed, it looks like to me at least, based on the documents and reading between the lines, the targeting of Flynn by Comey. In fact, Comey was so aggressive that he was bypassing the Justice Department, bypassing Obama's own appointee, Sally Yates, who had been kept on by President Trump for a bit as acting Attorney General. She was insistent, and DOJ officials were insistent, that the White House be told about their alleged concerns, which I think were just bunk. But anyway, they had concerns about conversations he had with the ambassador, and Comey refused to. And in fact, when it push came to shove, Yates called Comey up. He delayed responding to her, and by the time he got back to her, he said, well, the agents are already there talking to him. They're on their way. And she and her colleagues hit the roof accordingly, but didn't stop them for keeping on pushing this fraud notion that an incoming national security advisor wasn't allowed to be talking to the Russian ambassador. But that's a whole other matter. And now you have the Justice Department disavowing that conduct, essentially, and said there was no lawful reason, no predicate for interviewing Flynn to begin with. And given everything that went on, not only with essentially the ambush interview, but the subsequent failure the subsequent, let's put it this way, distortion of what Flynn said, meaning he didn't lie, but they didn't think they could prove the case, and they needed to pull the case back. It's a startling admission. It wasn't a full confession, because there are many, many issues that weren't raised and need to be pursued. But Flynn has been vindicated, and those of us who thought he was wrong from the get-go have been vindicated as well. And many of us, there were a lot of people who came late to the game, but many of us understood from initially that this was targeting, it was improper, and in my view, it was all part of the coup against President Trump.
Yeah, I think those are all good takeaways. There's a lot of specifics there I want to expand on, and a lot of big picture stuff too. But this is another one of those things which is very interesting, Tom, because this is one where all of us who are remotely unbiased when viewing President Trump saw this as pretty clear example of the deep state railroading someone because he was connected to Trump. And it was a pretty good job by alternative media, right of center media, who kept kind of pulling this thread back. And then now just huge vindication on our side. But you're not even seeing that being acknowledged by people on the Democratic side. It seems like everyone on the Democrat side melted down yesterday and acted as though it's Trump who's engaged in some sort of corruption here. When you look at the information, how could you see something other than a clear political targeting. I mean, it's overwhelming, the evidence at this point, and yet it seems like half the country still doesn't see it.
Well, look, the political left is more than willing to violate the civil liberties of their political enemies. And look, as Flynn demonstrates, as the targeting of Trump by Mueller demonstrates, as the coup demonstrates, the Constitution, our civil rights, they don't matter. They would put us in jail because they don't like our politics. They don't like our ideology.
That's right. That's right.
Or we're getting in the way of whatever power plays they want. And they're reaffirming that yesterday, where you had an attorney general at the recommendations of another U.S. attorney who reviewed the documents that had been hidden from the American people and the court, and General Flynn, contrary to law. He looked at the documents and said, this can't stand. And, in fact, the documents show that the FBI didn't go after Flynn, didn't send those agents to interview Flynn because they were interested in justice. They were interested in getting him fired. And sure enough, they had every indication to believe that he didn't lie. Even Comey says, well, you could make an argument he lied. I mean, that's the idea that anyone would go to jail because there's someone who says, well, you could make an argument you lied. I mean, that's no way to run a railroad if you're director of FBI. I'll tell you, President Trump deserves a medal for firing Comey. He was the most corrupt FBI director in the modern era. Hoover, I know, had his issues, but my gosh, Comey in this day and age, and given our expectations for civil liberties and what an FBI director is supposed to do, Comey was a gangster.
Yeah, and not a particularly bright one, it appears, because there's a lot of carelessness and sloppiness here. And I think a lot of the one of the biggest reveals from this week was an FBI official scribbling notes in that what's our goal, true/admission or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired, ? This is the whole thing, which is not about getting at information. It's about seeing if we can get Flynn to lie and get fired, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. And so the defense that if I had if I had someone from the left-wing side, Democratic side, in your chair, Tom, they'd probably be citing to me this section where Flynn did tell the vice president that he did not talk to Kislyak, or the contents were different about what they talked about, and then he later on reversed it. And then that was where the admission of a lie came in, I guess, and that was why he left the administration. But Flynn's team now says he was basically coerced to kind of a bargaining down his sentence. Talk to us about this, because this is very crucial, because this is what the Democrats are going to say, that Flynn already owned up to some of this stuff, and so this was all an open and shut case a long time ago. Talk to us about this.
Well, whether he lied to the vice president or not is almost irrelevant, because that's a political question in many ways. His statement does not say he lied to the vice president. He says he may have inadvertently left some material out in the rush. Sure. There's frankly, and now the vice president suggests, well, I don't think he necessarily lied to me in retrospect. The less big argument is, well, Flynn pled guilty, and the legal response to that. It's one thing for a hack to say that, but to hear lawyers say that, it's disturbing. It shows you that they're willing to distort the law to destroy their enemies. You can only confess to something under law if it's a voluntary and knowing. And it's clear that General Flynn did not know that he was set up like he was. He did not know that they did not realize, or he did not know when he made his plea, that the Justice Department and the FBI concluded that he hadn't lied. And obviously it was coerced because they were going after his son. So, that's not a legitimate plea. He didn't plead guilty under the law because it was A, involuntary,
right,
and B, it was not knowing, meaning he didn't know all the information that we now know about why he was targeted. And there were these big documents that have been released. Obviously, the Justice Department filing was released yesterday, and then the documents that have been released last week that the Justice Department file re-echoed. But people should go back and read General Flynn's declaration he filed that became public just recently, where he describes that he said, I wouldn't have done this if I had known this. And legally that's significant. It was a coerced, involuntary plea that was done in ignorance, and under the law, it's no plea at all.
It's a good point, and to note his son. This is why it's so resonant when you say Comey is a gangster, because it was clear that he's using family members against General Flynn in order to get what he wants, and that's something that is, that's not something that you see in our vaunted law enforcement agencies. It's something you do see in mob movies. That's where you see that sort of behavior, and that's what he was.
Right. And of course, Mueller's operation was the one that pursued this prosecution.
Yeah.
Knowing all of this, and this Justice Department and this FBI, they would have put Comey in jail. This FBI, this Justice Department, they would have sent Flynn to jail, but for the interventions of Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell. I appreciate these documents were released. I appreciate Barr did the right thing in the end, but let's be clear, none of this was voluntary, and Flynn only got justice because he had a lawyer who insisted upon it. And these documents were in the custody control of the FBI and Justice Department, and the agencies knew or should have known what was going on here. It was only because they had two lawyers push back against them, against the entire political class here in town,
incredible,
including the current Justice Department and FBI. This was a Mueller that was trying to put Flynn in jail. This was the Justice Department after Mueller left, and the FBI after Comey was fired. What rotten agencies they are. Justice is a little bit has been advanced here, but it's no solace. We've got real issues at Justice and FBI.
I'm completely with you on this, and the corruption of these agencies has been one of the biggest stories of the last decade in this country, and it's so apparent now more than ever. But I want to go back and talk about a couple of things you mentioned earlier. You hold Obama particularly culpable in this case. Expand on that for me.
Well, Sally Yates nailed Obama in this Justice Department filing the documents. She was interviewed, I think, by a special counsel. And there was a meeting at the Oval Office. This is the infamous January 5th, 2017 meeting where they talked about ambushing then President-elect Trump with the fraud dossier. They all knew the dossier was fraud at the time. But they had a big meeting, and Obama held back Yates and Comey and talked about Flynn. And he had known about the communications between Flynn and the ambassador. And it looks like, based on the documents, that he knew about the issue of pursuing the Logan Act against him. And he raised the prospect of, well, what do we do about Flynn? Do we treat him differently? And Yates didn't really understand what he meant until, obviously, Comey began pursuing this jihad against Flynn on the Logan Act, where Comey seemed to be pursuing what Obama wanted to do, which is to curtail information given to the incoming president and the incoming White House to get Flynn, because Obama hated Flynn.
Wow, that's very dramatic. But is there any recourse? Is there any way to hold Obama accountable?
Well, one of the things that ought to be done in the least is that he should be questioned about. I mean, forget about be questioning him under oath, which is, I think, sort of a basic box that needs to be checked. Maybe someone should ask him a question about it. I mean, the media has completely protected this man, and he orchestrated and was behind and is ultimately responsible for the worst corruption scandal in American history. He makes Richard Nixon look like a piker. He not only authorized and obviously approved unprecedented spying on the candidate that was seeking to succeed him for the opposite party, but then after the president was elected, he rushed out and targeted this president with this an all-hands-on-deck effort to smear him on this Russia collusion crap. and then continued, in my view, in a seditious way, to try to undermine and destroy his presidency on his way out the door. Incredible story. And Comey's the bad guy, but he was doing it at the direction of Barack Obama. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, certainly. And, I was reading through at Breitbart, we had probably 10 or 12 stories on this yesterday, but there's a 2-paragraph section that's written very sterilely by Joel Pollack, one of our top writers. But Tom, it does seem like it's out of a spy novel. It seems like almost the synopsis of a spy novel. Flynn's conversations with Kislyak were picked up by wiretaps of the ambassador, and his name was unmasked by Obama administration officials in a transcript of the conversation, which were then leaked to the Washington Post. At the same time, the Obama Justice Department investigated Flynn under the Logan Act of 1799, which prevents private citizens from conducting diplomacy but is never enforced. Though the FBI found no evidence of wrongdoing, as shown in the documents produced by the FBI to Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, last week, senior officials kept the case open anyway. This is all stuff that it shows you the conspiracy is so vast, and now it's all detailed. We have all the details of it. And then you start hearing things like James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, who was one of the top Russia collusion hoaxsters, basically leaking anonymously deep state information on CNN one day after the next, saying that he never saw any direct evidence of the Trump campaign or anyone plotting or conspiring with the Russians to meddle in the election. I mean, they don't have a leg to stand on. So where does that leave a guy like an Adam Schiff? Where does that leave someone like a James Clapper, who have been clearly hoaxing the publicly for years now?
Well, I don't know where legally it leaves them. I mean, to me, some of these folks ought to be prosecuted, or at least hauled before a grand jury to figure out whether they can be prosecuted, as opposed to, just saying, well, nothing can be done. Adam Schiff should be head of the Intelligence Committee. The president should cut him off from access to classified information, even if he remains as head of the Intelligence Committee. That access is not a right; it's a privilege, and he doesn't deserve the privilege. There've been knowing lies about the president. And they broke every rule in the book to try to take him down, including leaking classified information repeatedly. In the case of Schiff, he likely obtained classified information from that whistleblower that, in my view, should require a criminal investigation. So, look, they all knew that the idea that Trump colluded with the Russians is a lie. They all knew, and they knowingly kept that lie going through the Mueller operation, into impeachment, through impeachment. This was a coup, plain and simple, and you can see yesterday's reaction. They still are pushing it. They're still pushing the coup. I mean, they're still smearing Flynn. What Flynn was doing in talking to the Russian ambassador, he was doing his job as incoming national security advisor that every transition official in similar positions should have done and would have done over generations. That's why the idea that the Logan Act applies to the transition team of an incoming presidency is absurd. But of course, it's typical of the left. We always think these things are new, but they've been doing this for years. Every time a Republican replaces a Democrat, they accuse them of stealing the election or cheating with foreigners. That's what they said about Reagan. With the Iranians. They then kept on pushing it when George W. Bush was running. I mean, this idea of the Logan Act, it's nothing new for the left. They've been doing it repeatedly in the modern era. Johnson went after Nixon about the same issue. He thought that Nixon was working with the Vietnamese behind his back. All balderdash, and it's typical of the left. The left can't stand to lose. And you think they're concerned about the Constitution? No, the Constitution is a means to an end. And as soon as it gets in the way, they don't care. So elections, the Constitution, their civil liberties, they pretend to believe in them, but it's all about power, and they'll throw them out the door. And we've seen it with Trump and Flynn in a heartbeat.
Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch is with me. 2 more questions, Tom. Thanks for all the time early this morning. I really appreciate it. I know the audience is really benefiting. It's a lot of people are personally concerned for Michael Flynn. A lot of people connected with him. He comes off very authentic. So he's got a lot of fans out there. and people are concerned that he lost his life savings. I think he had to have all these home mortgages to try to fight some of these bogus targeting, because it was basically, the strategy was to bleed him dry of legal resources. That was largely successful. Do we have any sense of if he's able to get his life savings back? Is he able to get his life back at all from all this? Because it was so clear he's a victim of a massive conspiracy.
Well, if I were Flynn, I'd say I want to check for $40 million from the U.S. Treasury for what they did to me, or something like that. Maybe the Republicans can designate funds in the next gargantuan spending package that I'm sure is going to come for General Flynn. But, he's got lawsuits I'm sure he can pursue. And, given that Justice Department filing, there's potential liability in the tens of millions of dollars, as far as best I can tell. I ain't no lawyer, but I don't think you need to see a lawyer that think maybe there's a big lawsuit here that's going to result in additional vindication for Flynn, and maybe the government can begin to make him whole. And I also want prosecutions.
Yes, that's my next question.
Is probably less concerned about money than we are for him.
Sure,
he probably wants prosecutions too, because it's not about whether he lost money or not. I'm sure from his perspective, it's about whether the country's been harmed and whether there's going to be justice for those who tried to take out a republic.
And I'm unbelievably cynical in this regard, but let's say theoretically the Republicans can get it together and hold some people accountable. Where would you start?
Oh, I'd start at the top leadership. The names that have always been out there: Comey, McCabe. McCabe was involved in this too. Page Strzok, Brennan. That whole inside leadership gang that targeted Trump. I think they misused their offices and abused their powers to deprive Americans of their civil rights. Terrible crimes.
Tom Fitton, judicialwatch.org. Tell people how they can support Judicial Watch if they want to.
They can go to judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org, and obviously they should learn about all the documents we got about this conspiracy, both against Flynn and others, and just get the word out. And we're on Facebook and Twitter as well. So I encourage people to figure it out, because as I say, to learn more, because as I say, this was not a full confession, Alex.
Yes.
There are thousands and tens of thousands of documents out there they're still sitting on, a motherload of documents that still need to be pursued. And the Justice Department hasn't admitted that they did anything wrong here, per se. So there's a lot more to be uncovered.
Yeah, there is a lot more. We'll get into a little more of that after the break. But Tom Fitton, really appreciate all the time. Thanks for the great work.
You're welcome. Thank you, Alan.
We appreciate it. We'll be right back.